we should start out with what, you know, what the ideal is, and we say that North Reading School District is committed to a civil, respectful, and safe educational environment for all of its students and its staff. And I think it's important not to distinguish between one, even with staff. I would find it difficult to delineate different groups of staff to say, well, for this category of staff and how they interact is okay, but for this other one it is not. I think if you have a policy on anti-harassment or anti-bullying, then it covers everyone. And it's certainly mindful of the developmental needs of a child, but certainly we could see, for example, in late elementary school, I could imagine, we have conversations, I know our principals and teachers have conversations with children who oftentimes, you know, might say, let's all agree to make this person over here not part of the group. Now that is different than saying, I don't want to be your friend. That's a deliberate, intentional act where one student begins to focus inappropriate behavior, whether it is everyone getting up in a lunchroom or recess or in a classroom. That's a deliberate, intentional act, and it's not acceptable. Now the consequences to that would be different for a younger child, and it requires a lot of education on the part of teachers and staff. And then we can go all the way to high school. I don't feel that, you know, if you have a staff, certainly in the classroom, is no different than how you might interact with a student in athletic program or in any of the extracurricular activities. We expect the adults to be in charge, and we expect a high level of standards that for all of them. And that's what this policy should cover as well.
And I agree, and that's another area that I had on this policy. In the second to last paragraph, it outlines the action. If any student, parent, guardian of the student suspect that a student has been subject to bullying, he or she should inform the principal. And it goes on to say, but there's a couple of categories that I'm missing. I'd like to see something that references the victim of bullying. If the student is being bullied, what do they do? And then also, it doesn't really mention anything about staff-to-staff bullying or intimidation, or a student reporting a staff member that's bullying or intimidating the student. Because I agree, those are other areas, maybe not so often as student-to-student bullying, but I think they should be included somehow in the policy. I think it is great that you start out on a positive note, and that, you know, we can tweak bullying and how specific do we want to get it, or if we want to leave it open for principals to be able to interpret and deal on punishment that's age appropriate. But I think we want to wrap it up with some means of mentioning prevention measures that the district takes, and then maybe some kind of intervention strategies. I found one sample, the Sudbury schools, that it's probably says the same thing, but in a very specific kind of an outline format. And I think that lends itself to a student handbook, because we're really going to be expecting the kids to understand this. And so I think after we decide what we want to say, I think we need to put it in a language that kids will be very clear about.
And I agree with that. We talked about that as a subcommittee, that once a policy is formulated, that there needs to be a very specific set of guidelines. The Sudbury, we looked at the Sudbury, I don't know if I want to call it a policy, because it's titled, at least the one we had, Sudbury Public Schools Administrative Procedures and Guidelines. And I don't think was their policy per se.
This is the one they posted.
Right, but I think we understood that to be the guidelines that would be in a handbook,
I don't
as
know.
opposed to kind of a more general statement of a policy. I think we clearly agreed at our last meeting that there needed to be a set of guidelines that would ultimately accompany the policy. The policy is really defining it, what do you mean by bullying, what's the scope of it, and then basically ending with, and it directs, the school committee directs the administration to develop policies around that.
So
And so
that-
we haven't really developed the guidelines yet.
No, we actually discussed making the last two paragraphs part of regulations rather than part of the policy itself. I argued to keep it in just to have it firmly in place that there will be concrete actions taken without hesitation by the administration if such an incident should occur.
Just to,
I think also that before this policy ever got into a school committee or final adoption, our plan would be to send it through legal review. I mean, the
Yeah.
nature of this policy requires that there be the legalese be adopted here and incorporated in a very technical and legal way.
just from my point of view, I don't have as many issues with it as a few of the other members, but I do have an issue with that first sentence in paragraph 3. I just don't, I don't know why or if we should include specific types of examples.
That's wrong.
Because, but it's just that first sentence. And then the other question I have is, the fourth paragraph, I guess I understand what we're saying there about nothing in the policy requires the affected student or staff member to possess a characteristic that is a perceived basis for the bullying, harassment, or belong to any legally protected group. Why is that necessary? I mean, if we're saying there's a bullying policy, I'm not clear why we need to specifically call out legally protected groups or characteristics. I guess that's the other.
Distinguish.
Yeah, I don't, because if we're saying there's no bullying, I don't think we need to, personally, I don't think we need to call
It
it out.
applies to everybody
Right, uniformly. And it's almost like, to me, we're almost calling that out when we don't, I mean, I understand what you're doing there, but it's almost like we're calling it out when we don't need to. Other than that, those are the only two things that I agree with you in leaving the last two paragraphs in here, and then I think we do need, at some point, you need to come up with the guidelines like Sudbury has, which kind of lists what'll happen, the procedures that we follow if a claim is, a charge is brought of bullying, and then either against a staff or student, and then what we do in that case.
I think this is a very important policy to get right,
Yes.
and I just felt like we were rushing it at the end rather than fully developing.
I just have one more comment. So, in the very last paragraph, it says students who engage repeatedly in bullying behavior. I think the word repeatedly should be left out. Students
Yeah.
who engage in bullying behavior may be recommended. I
Yes.
don't know that the word
And
repeatedly.
then we can decide
Right, what-
whether it's
Right.
repetitious or
Right.
really onerous, or you can judge that.
Right, because someone could bully once, but it could be, really heinous.
Yeah,
and,
so
terrible.
repeatedly
So I
to me
don't think we
necessary.
need, I think it could be one incident.
Oh, that's true, I hadn't thought of it in that context.
Yeah. So I guess,
Except that usually bullying is carried out.
it usually is over time, right,
It's a repetitive.
right,
And pervasive.
right.
Kind of a thing.
In the fourth paragraph, the second sentence, I believe that is actually a legal requirement to state that it would be, that if an affected student or staff member does belong to a protected group, the perpetrator or perpetrators may be subject to prosecution under hate crimes law as well as school discipline.
Are you going to include that without including
Right.
Right.
the
The
whole,
first-
the whole
the
part of
The
this
first
sentence?
sentence, right. So what do we do here? It seems like we need to remand this back to the subcommittee,
Well,
because we're
I
not going
think
to.
part of what we wanted to see tonight was to put it out there on the table. This is a critical policy, and it does require input from multiple sources. This has been passed through the administrative council as well, and we feel that, again, they recognize that this needs to be done. They're anxious to see it on the books and also to work to develop those guidelines. And my suggestion would be that individual committee members, some of you have already done that, take what we have here and give some input, write it up, mark it up, and then we'll bring it back to the policy subcommittee. But I'd like to, not want to push it through, but I do think that there needs to be a commitment to get it done within, at least so that it's ready for the start of the school year.
And my question is, will it be, will we make a special effort to communicate to students and staff that we now have this policy?
We're required to, every year, and we do, to inform students and staff about harassment and anti-harassment. I think that we can do a better job at working with our students, although we have a number of programs that through our Youth at Risk Committee that are focused on anti-bullying. And then how you write this, include this, and the language that you use in handbooks is also important. To stick it at the end of a handbook and never come back and talk about it with students really defeats the overall.
Well, that's what I say. For example, I think if we have it in place for the next school year, which I think is extremely important, that, for example, on the teacher orientation day, 3 to 5 minutes is set aside to inform them of this new policy. And also, the students need to be informed of this policy. I think it could have an impact on some kids who might say, some kids who might be on that edge there, and they say, you know what, I don't really want to get messed up in this kind of stuff. I'm gonna stay away from this. And I think it's important that we don't go overboard in communicating it, but I think it needs to be communicated that we have this policy when we do get it in place in an effective way. Whether it's a note home to the parents or a copy of
Yeah.
the thing, or put it up on the website, and here's a new policy, we got it. So we won't take a vote on I don't think we can take a vote on the first reading tonight. So we should all make input, suggestions, or Nicole's not gonna be able to see this through to the end. Get 2 more weeks though. Is that, so get input from us and then, get it back to you and then back to the subcommittee for the next go-round?
If you want, I can incorporate the changes
Okay, so
suggested
we can-
tonight and send it to David and he can circulate.
yeah, that
the
might be a good
amended
idea.
version around.
So we'll email them to you?
Yeah,
Or
Did you,
I can email what's been done tonight to David and he can email it around depending on what time frame you want.
yeah, so
Okay.
if you got, okay, that'd be good. Anything else?
I'm good.
Okay. Anything else? Great, thanks, Nicole.
Well, and
Okay.
Cliff certainly put some time into this.
And Cliff. Okay, next, budget workshop. Seems we've been here before. The phrase deja vu comes to mind here. Yeah, all over again. However, I believe we need to take a vote at our next meeting on a budget to give us time to then have a budget hearing. I believe Carl, the selectman, said they'd like a budget from us by June 1st, correct? Because they want to get it on the website before when's the meeting, June 8th, June 9th? I'm trying to, meeting. June 8th. And I believe we're gonna be going over a lot of the same things tonight. It's my recommendation tonight that I think we have to come up with a budget figure that takes some stimulus money into account. Although I would like Carl to explain how we budget for that stimulus money, before we go to that. But not all the stimulus money.
Right.
And also the fact that I don't believe we're anywhere near a budget coming out of Beacon Hill. We started debating a sales tax increase today, which the governor said he's going to veto. They obviously don't have the votes because they keep going out for recess and then coming back and going out for so we know they don't have the votes.
It's a nice
to-
day, of course they
Right.
go off for recess.
They don't have the votes to override that veto at this time.